What if I told you that the reason you still can't speak English isn't because you're lazy or stupid, but because you've been trying too hard? And what if the cure wasn't another grammar book, but something as simple as pulling weeds in your own backyard with someone you love? Stay with me. This 90-minute story changed my marriage, my English, and my entire life in America. Let me show you. The silent yard. Let me paint you a picture. It's a Saturday morning, about 2 years ago. I'm standing in my backyard in Texas, coffee in one hand, and a pair of rusty garden gloves in the other. The sun is already angry at 8 a.m. And the yard? Oh, the yard is a disaster. Weeds everywhere. Not the cute, tiny ones. I'm talking about those massive, thick-stemmed monsters that look like they'd been training for a fight. Our backyard looked like a jungle that had given up on life. But here's the thing that still makes me laugh when I think about it. The yard wasn't even the biggest mess in that house. The biggest mess was standing right next to me. My husband. And the silence between us was so loud, you could hear it over the lawnmower. We had been living in the United States for a while by then. Not new immigrants, not fresh off the plane. We had jobs. We had a routine. We had 2 beautiful kids who spoke English like little native speakers, switching between cartoon quotes and schoolyard slang without even blinking. But us? The adults? We had stopped talking. Not because we were angry. Not because we were fighting. Worse than that. We had simply run out of words. And when you run out of words in a language that isn't your first, the silence feels 10 times heavier. I remember standing there, looking at those weeds, and thinking, I don't even know how to say this is overwhelming in English without sounding like a robot. The words existed in my head. Of course they did. I had studied English for years. I could read a business email. I could understand the news, mostly. But speaking? Real, natural, on-the-spot speaking? My brain would freeze. My mouth would forget how to make sounds. And the worst part? Every time I opened my mouth and something wrong came out, I felt this hot wave of shame crawl up my neck. So I stopped trying. And he stopped trying. And we just existed in the same house, in the same yard, in the same silent, weed-infested life. Have you ever felt that? That moment when you want to say something simple, like I'm tired or can you help me with this? But your brain offers you nothing but a blank, white wall? And then, instead of trying again, you just swallow the words and walk away? Yeah. That was us. Every single day. The funny thing is, nobody tells you about this part when you're learning English. All the apps, all the textbooks, all the YouTube videos, they teach you grammar. They teach you vocabulary. They teach you how to order coffee or ask for directions. But nobody teaches you what to do when the silence between you and the person you love becomes a third roommate. Nobody teaches you how to say I miss you in a way that doesn't sound like a rehearsed line from a movie. Nobody teaches you that sometimes, the hardest English isn't the business meeting. It's the Saturday morning when you're standing next to your spouse, pulling weeds, and you have nothing to say. So there I was. Gloves on. Coffee getting cold. Weeds mocking me. And my husband, let's call him Mike, not his real name, but close enough, was standing about 10 feet away, also pulling weeds. Also silent. Also trapped in his own head. We had become 2 people who shared a house, shared kids, shared a mortgage, but couldn't share a sentence in English without it feeling like a job interview. And then, something small happened. Mike pulled a really stubborn weed. I mean, this thing was deep. He grunted. He tugged. He almost fell backward. And when the weed finally came out, roots and all, he looked at it, looked at me, and said, "This one, strong." 3 words. 3 simple, not even correct words. No is. No was. Just this one strong. A toddler could have said it better. But here's what I noticed. He didn't apologize. He didn't correct himself. He didn't look embarrassed. He just held up that ugly, dirty weed like a trophy and grinned. And for the first time in months, I smiled back. A real smile. Not the polite, "I'm fine" smile. A genuine, "you look ridiculous but I love you" smile. And I said, "Yeah. You pulled good." Also not correct grammar. Also not something you would write in an email. But it was real. It was ours. And in that tiny, stupid moment, something cracked open. Just a little. Just enough for a sliver of light to get in. That was the morning I started wondering, what if pulling weeds could pull us closer? What if the garden wasn't just a chore, but a classroom? What if the slow, awkward, imperfect English we spoke out there, away from the judgment of the world, away from the pressure of getting it right, was actually the best English we had ever spoken? I didn't know the answer yet. But I knew I wanted to find out. So I put down my coffee. I walked over to where Mike was standing. And I pointed at the next weed, a massive one, right in the middle of the yard, surrounded by smaller ones. I looked him in the eye, took a breath, and said, "Together?" 1 word. 7 letters. Not a complete sentence. But he understood. He nodded. And we both reached for the same weed. That Saturday morning changed everything. Not overnight. Not magically. But it planted a seed that would grow into something neither of us expected. A new language. A new marriage. A new life, right there in that messy, weed-choked, beautiful backyard. But that's the next part of the story. For now, just sit with this question: what if the place you feel most stuck, the yard, the silence, the broken English, is actually the perfect place to start growing again? What if we try? So there we were. Mike and me. Both holding on to the same giant weed. Our hands almost touching. And for a ridiculous second, I felt like we were in one of those romantic movies where the music swells and everything goes slow motion. Except there was no music. There was just the sound of a distant lawnmower from the neighbor's yard, and the smell of dirt. And my back already complaining because I'm not 20 anymore. We pulled. Together. 1, 2, 3. Nothing happened. That weed was not impressed. It sat there in the ground like a grumpy old man who refuses to move. Mike grunted. I grunted. The weed laughed at us. And then, because I couldn't help myself, I said out loud, "This is harder than I thought." Now, was that perfect English? No. A grammar teacher might say, "You should say this is harder than I thought it would be." But you know what? That we didn't care. And neither did Mike. He looked at me, sweat already dripping down his face, and said, "Yeah. Maybe we need different way." Different way. Not a different way. Just different way. Missing the article. Wrong word order? Actually no, it was fine, but still. My point is, it wasn't textbook English. It was real English. The kind of English that gets the job done. The kind of English that makes you understand and be understood, even if it's not perfect. And that's when it hit me. A thought so simple and so obvious that I couldn't believe I had never seen it before. What if the problem wasn't my English? What if the problem was where I was trying to use it? Think about it. For years, I had been practicing English in the worst possible places. At work, where every email had to be perfect or I'd look unprofessional. At the store, where the cashier was in a hurry and I was holding up the line. At parent-teacher conferences, where the other parents sounded so smooth and I sounded like a broken GPS. Everywhere I tried to speak English, there was pressure. Judgment. A clock ticking. And my brain, being the wonderful, overprotective organ that it is, would shut down. Not because I didn't know the words, but because I was scared. Scientists call this affective filter. It's a fancy term for a simple idea. When you're anxious, embarrassed, or stressed, your brain puts up a wall. It literally blocks language learning and language production. You can know a word perfectly. You can have used it 100 times. But the moment someone looks at you expectantly, that word disappears into a black hole in your mind. And then you stand there, mouth open, feeling like the dumbest person on the planet. Sound familiar? Yeah. I thought so. But out here, in the backyard, pulling weeds? There was no pressure. No audience. No one grading my grammar. Just Mike and me and a bunch of stupid weeds. And slowly, like a turtle coming out of its shell, I started saying things. Small things. Imperfect things. Real things. Mike, can you pull that one? The big one. On the left. My hands hurt. These gloves are not good. I think we need water. I'm very hot. None of these sentences were beautiful. None of them would win a prize. But every time I said one, Mike understood. And every time Mike said something back, I understood too. Not because our English was perfect, but because we were paying attention. We were looking at the same weeds, feeling the same sun, fighting the same dirt. We had context. And context, my friend, is the secret weapon that textbooks never give you. Let me explain. When you learn English from a book, you learn isolated sentences. The cat is on the table. I would like a cup of coffee. These sentences are fine. But they have no roots. They don't connect to anything real in your life. So when you try to remember them, your brain has nothing to hold on to. It's like trying to grab smoke. But when you learn English while doing something, while pulling a weed, while planting a tomato, while chasing a kid across the yard, the words stick. Because your brain isn't just memorizing sounds. It's building memories. It's connecting the word to the feeling of dirt on your hands, the smell of cut grass, the sound of your spouse laughing. Those connections make the words real. And when words are real, you don't forget them. That Saturday, we didn't plan to learn anything. We didn't have a vocabulary list or a grammar lesson. We just kept pulling weeds. And somehow, without trying, we started talking. Not big, deep conversations. Not yet. Just small things. Pass me the thing. The green tool. This route is so long. Look. Like a snake. I'm tired. 5 more minutes? And here's the magic part. Every time one of us said something imperfect, the other one didn't correct it. We just responded. Not because we were being nice, but because we genuinely understood. And that understanding, that feeling of being understood even when your English is messy, is the most powerful motivation in the world. By the end of that first Saturday, we had cleared maybe a quarter of the yard. Not impressive by gardening standards. But by marriage standards? By English learning standards? We had done something huge. We had broken the silence. Not with perfect sentences. With imperfect ones. With real ones. As we walked inside, dirty and tired and thirsty, Mike looked at me and said something I'll never forget. He said, "Same time next week?" 3 words. Missing a the before same? Maybe. But I didn't care. I smiled and said, "Yes. Same time." And that was the beginning. The beginning of asking ourselves, what if we try? What if we don't need classrooms or apps or perfect grammar? What if all we need is a yard, some weeds, and the courage to speak badly but speak anyway? We didn't know the answer yet. But we were about to find out. Saturday by Saturday. Weed by weed. Word by word. First Saturday, awkward and quiet. Let me be honest with you. That first Saturday? It wasn't beautiful. It wasn't inspiring. If someone had filmed us and put it on the internet, the video would have gone viral for all the wrong reasons. 2 grown adults, standing in a messy yard, barely looking at each other, pulling weeds like robots who had forgotten their programming. No music. No heartfelt conversations. Just the awkward sound of dirt being ripped out of the ground and the occasional sigh. I remember thinking, this is ridiculous. We're not fixing anything. We're just gardening. Badly. Mike was wearing an old t-shirt with a hole in the armpit. I was wearing the same sweatpants I'd worn for 3 days. Neither of us had showered yet. The coffee was gone. The sun was getting hotter. And the weeds? The weeds were winning. Here's what nobody tells you about starting something new. The beginning is almost always ugly. Whether you're learning English, saving a marriage, or clearing a backyard, the first steps are clumsy, embarrassing, and full of silence. You want to skip to the part where everything is fixed. Where you're laughing and speaking fluently and holding hands in the sunset. But life doesn't work that way. And neither does language. So there we were. Awkward. Quiet. Each lost in our own head. Mike would pull a weed. Throw it in the pile. Move 2 feet. Pull another weed. Throw it. Move. Like a machine. No words. Just grunts. I would do the same. Pull. Toss. Move. Pull. Toss. Move. My back was starting to hurt. My gloves were already getting a hole in the thumb. And every few minutes, I would glance at Mike, open my mouth to say something, and then close it. Because what was I going to say? Nice weather we're having? That felt fake. I'm sorry we stopped talking? That felt too heavy. Pass me the trowel? I didn't even know the word for that tool in English. I still don't, honestly. I just call it the little digging thing. The silence was so thick you could have used it to patch the holes in our fence. And then, about 45 minutes in, something small happened. Mike pulled a weed that was connected to another weed underground. You know how some weeds have those long, sneaky roots that run everywhere? He pulled one, and 3 others came up with it, like a family holding hands. He was so surprised that he let out a little laugh. Not a big laugh. Just a small huh. But it was a sound. A human sound. In all that silence, I looked over. He was holding up the tangled mess of weeds like a fisherman showing off a catch. And without thinking, I said, "Oh. They are friends." Now, let me pause here. "They are friends" is not a profound sentence. A 5-year-old could say it. But in that moment, it was the first real thing I had said all morning. Not rehearsed. Not worried about grammar. Just true. Those weeds were connected. They were like friends holding hands underground. And for some reason, that image made me laugh too. Mike looked at me. He smiled. And he said, "Yeah. Bad friends. Very bad friends." We both laughed. Not a huge, belly laugh. Just a small one. But it broke something. A crack in the wall of awkwardness. Then, of course, the awkwardness came rushing back. Because that's what it does. It doesn't leave easily. We went back to pulling weeds. The silence returned. But it was different now. Softer. Like the silence between two people who have remembered that the other person is still there. About an hour in, I needed a break. My knees were killing me. I sat down on the grass, or what used to be grass before the weeds took over. I took off my gloves and just looked at the yard. We had cleared maybe a small patch. Nothing impressive. But it was something. A tiny rectangle of clean dirt, surrounded by chaos. Like a little island of order in a sea of mess. Mike sat down next to me. Not too close. But not far either. He pulled out his water bottle, took a drink, and handed it to me. No words. Just the gesture. I took a sip. The water was warm. Gross, actually. But I didn't care. And then, out of nowhere, Mike said, "My English is not good." I know. But here. I don't feel scared. That sentence stopped my heart. Not because it was beautiful. But because it was true. He had just admitted something I had been feeling for years. We were both scared. Scared of saying the wrong thing. Scared of sounding stupid. Scared of being judged. But in the yard, pulling weeds, the fear was smaller. The weeds didn't care if we used the wrong preposition. The sun didn't care if we forgot a verb. The dirt didn't care if our accent was thick. Out here, we could be bad at English. And it was okay. I looked at Mike and said, "Me too." Here. I feel safe. Another imperfect sentence. Another moment of real connection. We sat there for maybe 5 minutes, not talking, just breathing. And then we got back up. Pulled more weeds. Said a few more words. Nothing big. Nothing life-changing. Just small, awkward, quiet attempts at being human together. By the end of that first Saturday, our hands were dirty, our backs were sore, and our English was still terrible. But something had shifted. The silence wasn't enemy territory anymore. It was just quiet. And quiet is okay. Quiet is better than frozen. Quiet means there's room for words to grow. As we walked inside, Mike looked at the kitchen clock. It was almost noon. We had spent 3 hours in that yard. 3 hours of mostly silence, interrupted by small, broken sentences. And somehow, that felt like more progress than any English class I had ever taken. That night, I lay in bed and thought, this is the ugliest, most awkward, most embarrassing start to anything ever. But maybe that's how starts are supposed to be. Maybe you can't get to the good part without going through the awkward part first. The next Saturday, we went back to the yard. Still awkward. Still quiet. But less. Just a little less. And the Saturday after that? Even less. And slowly, word by word, weed by weed, the awkwardness started to fade. Not because we got better at English. But because we got better at being bad at English together. And that, my friend, is where the real magic begins. Weeds don't need perfect English. Here's something I learned that second Saturday. Something that changed everything. Weeds don't care about your grammar. I know that sounds funny, but stay with me, because this is important. That second weekend, I woke up nervous. Which is ridiculous, right? Who gets nervous about pulling weeds? But I was. Because the first Saturday had been so awkward, and part of me expected the second Saturday to be even worse. I lay in bed thinking, what if we run out of things to say again? What if the silence comes back? What if we realize that the first Saturday was just a fluke and we actually have nothing to talk about? But Mike was already awake. I heard him in the kitchen, making coffee. And then I heard the back door open. He had gone outside. Without me. My heart sank for a second. But then I looked out the window. He wasn't ignoring me. He was standing in the middle of the yard, looking at the weeds we had cleared the week before. Just standing there. Coffee in hand. Like he was waiting for something. Or someone. I put on my sweatpants. The same ones. Don't judge me. I walked outside. He didn't say good morning. He just pointed at the ground and said, look. They came back. And sure enough, in the patch we had cleared, tiny little green shoots were already poking up through the dirt. New weeds. Small ones. Babies. But they were there. Undeniable. Like nature's way of saying, you thought you were done? Huh. We're just getting started. I should have been frustrated. All that work. All that pulling. And the weeds were already winning again. But instead, I laughed. Because it was so perfectly, absurdly like our marriage. And like our English. You clear one problem and another one grows. You learn one word, and 10 more words you don't know show up. You fix one fight, and 3 new fights appear. It never ends. Mike looked at me and said, weeds are stubborn. Yeah, I said. Like us. He laughed at that. A real laugh. And then he said something that I still think about all the time. He said, maybe we don't need to win. Maybe we just need to keep pulling. That sentence wasn't perfect English. But it was perfect wisdom. Because that's the secret nobody tells you about learning English. And about marriage. And about life. You don't need to win. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to keep showing up. Keep pulling. Keep trying. The weeds will always come back. The mistakes will always come back. The awkward silences will always come back. But if you keep pulling, keep talking, keep trying, something changes. Not the weeds. You. That Saturday, we did something different. Instead of pulling weeds in silence, we decided to name things. Every weed we pulled, we gave it a name. In English. Stupid names. But names. Mike pulled a huge, ugly weed with thick, hairy stems. He held it up and said, this is Harry. Because he is hairy. I pulled a twisted, tangled mess of roots that looked like it had been in a fight. I said, "This one is Messy Marvin." We kept going. "This is Spike. Because he is sharp." "This is Big Mama. Because she is big." "This is the boss. Because he is hard to pull." We weren't learning useful vocabulary. We weren't preparing for a job interview or a citizenship test. We were just playing. Like kids. And here's the thing about playing. When you play, your brain relaxes. When your brain relaxes, the affective filter drops. When the affective filter drops, language flows. Not perfect language, but real language. Scientists have studied this. They found that people learn languages faster when they're having fun. When they're not being tested. When they're not afraid of making mistakes. It seems obvious, right? But most of us spend years learning English the opposite way. Stressful. Serious. Afraid. We treat every sentence like a final exam. And then we wonder why we can't speak. The yard taught me something different. The yard taught me that mistakes are not failures. Mistakes are just weeds. You pull one, another grows. You make one mistake, you make another. But as long as you keep pulling, keep talking, keep trying, you're moving forward. Even when it doesn't feel like it. By the third Saturday, we had developed a rhythm. We would go outside, usually around 8 a.m., before the kids woke up. We'd grab our gloves and our water bottles. And we'd start pulling. Not in silence anymore. Not exactly. We'd talk. Small talk. Big talk. Medium talk. Sometimes about the weeds. Sometimes about the kids. Sometimes about nothing at all. And our English? It was still terrible. I'm not going to lie to you. We still forgot words. We still mixed up tenses. We still said things like yesterday I go to store instead of I went to the store. But here's what was different. We didn't care anymore. Or at least, we cared less. The yard had become a safe place. A place where bad English was allowed. A place where we could be beginners without being ashamed. One morning, I tried to say, "This weed has a really long root." But what came out was, "This weed long foot underground." Mike looked at me. I looked at Mike. And then we both burst out laughing. "Long foot," he repeated, giggling. "Weed has long foot." Was that embarrassing? A little. But was it the end of the world? No. It was just a mistake. A funny mistake. And the more mistakes we made, the less scary mistakes became. Until eventually, mistakes weren't scary at all. They were just part of the process. That's the gift that yard gave us. Not perfect English. But freedom. Freedom to be bad. Freedom to be wrong. Freedom to sound stupid and keep going anyway. And you know what? That freedom changed everything. Not just my English. My marriage. My life. Because once I stopped being afraid of saying the wrong thing, I started saying the right things. The real things. The things I had been swallowing for years. Things like, "I miss you." And, "I'm sorry." And, "I was wrong." Not perfect sentences. But perfect in their honesty. So here's my question for you. Where is your yard? Where is the place where you can be bad at English without being judged? Where is the person who will laugh with you, not at you, when you say long foot instead of long route. If you don't have that place yet, maybe it's time to create it. A kitchen table. A park bench. A phone call with a friend. Anywhere. Anywhere where imperfect English is welcome. Because here's the truth. Weeds don't need perfect English. And neither do you. The pulling rhythm. Have you ever had a moment where your body knows what to do, but your mouth doesn't? That was me every Saturday. My hands knew how to pull weeds. My knees knew how to kneel. My back knew how to complain. But my mouth? My mouth was still learning how to be a mouth again. By the fourth or fifth Saturday, something strange started happening. Mike and I weren't just pulling weeds anymore. We were moving together. Not on purpose. It just happened. He would reach for a weed on the left, and I would reach for one on the right. He would stand up to stretch, and I would stand up too, a few seconds later. Like we were dancing a slow, ugly, dirt-covered dance. I noticed it before he did. The rhythm. There's actual science behind this. Scientists call it rhythmic synchronicity. It's a fancy way of saying that when two people do the same physical activity together, walking, rowing, pulling weeds, their brains start to sync up. Their heart rates match. Their breathing aligns. And here's the crazy part. When your brain syncs with someone else's, the part of your brain that feels scared and judged, the amygdala, actually calms down. It's like your brain says, "Oh, we're doing this together. This must be safe. I can relax now." And when your brain relaxes, your mouth relaxes too. I remember one Saturday, we were both pulling a really stubborn area. The weeds were thick and the ground was dry and hard. Every pull was a battle. But somehow, without planning it, we fell into a rhythm. Pull. Toss. Move. Pull. Toss. Move. It was like a heartbeat. Or a song you can't stop humming. And then, in the middle of that rhythm, Mike said something without even looking up. He said, "My boss." He said something yesterday. I didn't understand. Just like that. A real sentence. About a real problem. At work. In English. He didn't introduce it. He didn't apologize for it. He just said it. Like we had been having conversations our whole lives. I stopped pulling for a second. Not because I was surprised by the words. But because I was surprised by how easy they sounded coming out of his mouth. No hesitation. No stuttering. Just words. What did he say? I asked. He said, "We need to circle back on the Henderson project." I don't know, circle back. What is circle back? I laughed. Not at him. With him. Because honestly, what even is circle back? Native speakers say these weird phrases all the time, and even they don't know what they mean. Circle back is just a fancy way of saying talk about it again later. But how is a non-native speaker supposed to know that? It means later, I said. We will talk later. About Henderson. Mike nodded. So not circle. Like a circle shape? No, I said, smiling. Not a shape. Just later. He laughed. English is so strange. Yes, I said. Very strange. And then we went back to pulling. Pull. Toss. Move. Pull. Toss. Move. The rhythm continued. But now, something had changed. We had crossed a line. Mike had asked for help with English. In English. And I had helped. In English. And neither of us had felt embarrassed. Neither of us had felt judged. We had just communicated. Like two people who trust each other. That's the thing about rhythm. It doesn't just sync your bodies. It syncs your trust. When you move together, pull together, sweat together, you start to feel like you're on the same team. And when you're on the same team, you're not afraid to be wrong. You're not afraid to ask stupid questions. You're not afraid to say, "I don't understand," for the 100th time. The yard became our team practice. Every Saturday, we showed up. We pulled weeds. We fell into the rhythm. And somewhere in that rhythm, the words came. Not all at once. Not perfectly. But they came. One Saturday, I tried to explain something about the kids' school. I wanted to say that their teacher had sent home a permission slip for a field trip. But I didn't know the word permission slip. So I said, the teacher gave a paper. For the zoo. The kids need signature. From us. Was that correct? No. Did Mike understand? Yes. He nodded and said, "Oh, a permission form. Yeah. I saw it on the fridge." He didn't correct me. He didn't say, "Actually, it's called a permission slip." He just repeated the correct word naturally, in his response. And my brain, without any effort, made a note, permission form. That's the word. That's another secret about learning English. You don't need someone to correct you. You just need someone to show you the right word, gently, without making you feel stupid. The yard gave us that. The rhythm gave us that. By the 6th Saturday, we weren't just pulling weeds. We were having conversations. Real ones. Not about deep things, mostly. About groceries. About the kids' homework. About whether we should fix the fence or just let it fall down. Small things. But small things are the foundation of everything. You don't build a marriage on big, dramatic conversations. You build it on 1,000 small ones. The same is true for language. One morning, as we were finishing up, Mike stood up, stretched his back, and looked at the yard. We had cleared maybe half of it by then. It wasn't beautiful. But it was better. He put his hands on his hips, like a general surveying a battlefield, and said, "We did good." 2 words. Missing a before good? Actually, "we did good" is colloquial, but fine. The point is, he wasn't worried about being correct. He was just talking. Like a normal person. In English. And I realized something. The rhythm wasn't just in our bodies anymore. It was in our words. We were finding a rhythm of speaking. Short sentences. Simple words. No pressure. Just pull, toss, move, talk. Pull, toss, move, talk. That's when I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, we were going to be okay. Not because our English was getting perfect. It wasn't. But because we had stopped being afraid. And when you stop being afraid, the words don't have to be perfect. They just have to be yours. Kids run into the yard. You know what's funny about trying to fix your marriage and your English in secret? Eventually, the kids find out. And kids have zero filter. Zero. They don't care about your carefully constructed safe space. They don't care about your emotional healing journey. They just show up and ask the most uncomfortable questions in the loudest voices possible. It happened on a Saturday. Maybe the 7th or 8th one. I've lost count by now. The sun was up. The coffee was hot. Mike and I were in our usual spots, pulling weeds, falling into our rhythm. And we were laughing. I don't even remember what about. Probably something stupid. One of us said a word wrong, or a weed fought back, or we just felt good. But we were laughing. Real laughter. The kind that comes from your belly and makes your face hurt. And then we heard the back door slam. MOM. Dad. Our daughter. 6 years old. Barefoot. Hair looking like she had stuck her finger in an electrical socket. She ran across the deck, jumped off the steps, and landed right in the middle of our cleared patch. Dirt flew everywhere. Why are you laughing? What's so funny? Is it a joke? Tell me the joke. I looked at Mike. Mike looked at me. We both looked at our daughter, who was now standing on a weed we hadn't pulled yet, completely unaware that she was crushing our progress. And then, before I could stop myself, I said, "We are laughing because this weed is very stubborn. Like you." Now, was that a great sentence? No. Was it even true? Not really. The weed wasn't stubborn. I just panicked. But my daughter didn't care about my grammar. She looked down at the weed under her foot, then back at me, and said, "Weeds can't be stubborn, Mom. They're plants." Mike snorted. I tried not to laugh. I failed. Okay, I said. You are right. Weeds are not stubborn. But pulling them is hard work. And sometimes, hard work is funny. My daughter tilted her head. She was not convinced. But then she did something unexpected. She knelt down, grabbed a tiny weed with both hands, and pulled. It came out easily. She held it up like a trophy and said, "That was easy. You guys are weird." And then she ran back inside to watch cartoons. Mike and I sat there in the dirt, looking at each other. And then we burst out laughing again. Because she was right. We were weird. Two grown adults, pulling weeds in silence for weeks, pretending we were fixing our marriage, when really we were just scared to talk. And a 6-year-old had just exposed us in 10 seconds. But here's what happened after that. Something shifted. The kids started coming outside with us. Not every Saturday. But sometimes. Our son, who was 4 at the time, would bring his little plastic shovel and dig holes in places we had already cleared. Our daughter would pull the smallest weeds and put them in a pile she called her collection. And slowly, the yard stopped being just Mike and me. It became a family place. A noisy, chaotic, beautiful family place. And with the kids around, our English changed too. Because kids don't care if you make mistakes. They don't judge your accent. They just want you to talk to them. One afternoon, our son was trying to say something about a worm he found. He was 4, so his English wasn't perfect either. He said, "Mom, look. The worm is wiggling. Very wiggling." I smiled and said, "Yes, baby. The worm is very wiggly." He repeated, "Wiggly. Worm is wiggly." And then he looked at me and said, "Mom, you said baby. That's not my name. My name is Leo." Kids, I tell you. They keep you humble. But that moment taught me something. My son wasn't correcting my English. He was just being a kid. He didn't care that I used the wrong word or that my accent was thick. He cared that I was talking to him. And that was enough. The same thing happened with our daughter. One Saturday, she asked me, "Mom, why do you and Dad talk funny?" I froze. "What do you mean?" "You say words slow. And sometimes wrong. Like when you said I eated breakfast instead of I ate breakfast." "My teacher says 8 is correct." I felt my face get hot. But before I could feel embarrassed, Mike jumped in. He said, "Because we are still learning, sweetheart. English is not our first language. But we are practicing. Just like you practice spelling words." Our daughter thought about this for a second. Then she said, "Oh. Okay. Can I have a snack?" And just like that, the moment passed. No judgment. No shame. Just a kid being a kid, and a dad being honest, and a mom realizing that maybe she didn't need to be perfect after all. That was the day I stopped being afraid of my kids hearing my bad English. Because they didn't care. They just wanted me to be their mom. And their mom talks funny sometimes. So what? Here's what I've learned about kids and language. Kids don't learn English by studying grammar. They learn by making mistakes. Thousands of them. They say goat instead of went. They say foots instead of feet. They say I runned instead of I ran. And nobody shames them for it. Nobody makes them feel stupid. Because everyone knows that's how learning works. But somehow, when we become adults, we forget that. We think we have to be perfect. We think one mistake means we're failures. We think everyone is judging us. But the truth is, most people aren't judging you. And the ones who are, they're not your people. The yard taught me that. The kids taught me that. And slowly, week by week, I started to believe it. One Saturday, after the kids had gone back inside, Mike looked at me and said, "Our English is still bad." I nodded. "Very bad." "But we are talking," he said. "Right?" "Yes," I said. "We are talking." And that was enough. Not perfect. Not fluent. Not impressive. Just enough. Because the goal was never to sound like a native speaker. The goal was to sound like us. Two imperfect people, speaking imperfect English, in an imperfect yard, building an imperfect but real life together. And honestly, that's better than perfect any day. Rainy Saturday, no plan. Have you ever noticed that the best moments in life are never the ones you plan? You can schedule everything. You can make lists and set alarms and prepare for every possible outcome. And then life just happens. Usually when you're holding a handful of dirt and wearing sweatpants with a hole in them. That's what happened to us on a Saturday that I'll never forget. It started like any other Saturday. Coffee. Gloves. The usual walk outside to survey the yard. The weeds were losing, by the way. Slowly. But they were losing. We had cleared maybe 2/3 of the backyard by then. You could actually see patches of grass. Real grass. The kind that doesn't try to take over your life. Mike was proud. I was proud. We didn't say it out loud, but we could feel it. The yard was becoming something. And so were we. The sky looked fine when we started. A little gray, maybe. But this is Texas. The sky is always a little something here. Too blue. Too gray. Too orange. Too dramatic. You learn to ignore it. So we ignored it. We put on our gloves. We grabbed our water bottles. And we started pulling. About an hour in, I felt a drop. Just one. On my arm. I looked up. The sky had turned a color that I can only describe as bruised. Dark gray with hints of purple and green. If you've never seen a Texas sky before a storm, imagine someone took a normal sky and punched it. Repeatedly. Mike, I said. I think rain is coming. He looked up. His face changed. Oh. That is a lot of rain. And then the sky opened up. Not a drizzle. Not a sprinkle. Not the gentle, oh how lovely, kind of rain you see in movies. This was Texas rain. The kind that falls in sheets. The kind that soaks you in 3 seconds. The kind that makes you question every life choice that led you to be standing in a backyard holding a weed in your hand. We ran. I wish I could tell you we ran gracefully, like people in a commercial for expensive rain jackets. We did not. I slipped on a patch of mud. Mike grabbed my arm to stop me from falling, but he lost his balance too. We both stumbled. I dropped my water bottle. He dropped his glove. The weed I had been holding flew out of my hand and landed somewhere in the chaos. We were a mess. A complete, utter, hilarious mess. By the time we reached the back door, we were soaked. Not wet. Soaked. The kind of wet where you can wring out your hair and fill a cup. The kind of wet where your shoes make squishing sounds with every step. The kind of wet where you look at each other and have no choice but to laugh. And laugh we did. We stood in the kitchen, dripping water all over the floor, and we laughed. Not a small laugh. A big laugh. The kind that comes from somewhere deep and doesn't stop until your stomach hurts. Mike's hair was plastered to his forehead. My sweatpants looked like they weighed 20 pounds. Water was dripping off our noses. And we just stood there, in our messy kitchen, laughing like idiots. Then we heard footsteps. 2 sets of small, fast footsteps. Mom. Dad. Are you okay? Our daughter came running down the hall, followed closely by our son. They stopped at the edge of the kitchen and stared at us like we were aliens. Which, to be fair, we probably looked like aliens. 2 grown humans, standing in a puddle, covered in mud and weeds, laughing hysterically for no apparent reason. Why are you all wet? Our son asked. Because, I said, still laughing, the rain, it came. Fast. Very fast. You should have come inside earlier, our daughter said. In that tone. You know the tone. The one that says, I'm 6 and I'm smarter than you. Mike looked at her. Yes, he said. We should have. But we were. Not paying attention. Obviously, she said. And then, because kids are unpredictable and wonderful, she ran to the bathroom and came back with 2 towels. She threw one at me and one at Mike. Dry yourselves, she ordered. You're getting water everywhere. Our son, not wanting to be left out, ran to get 2 more towels. Then 2 more. By the end, we had 7 towels on the kitchen floor. The kids were now also wet, because they had stepped in the puddle. The dog had come to investigate and was also wet. The cat was watching from the top of the fridge, judging all of us. It was chaos. Beautiful, noisy, ridiculous chaos. And in the middle of all that chaos, I realized something. We were speaking English. All of us. Not perfect English. Not careful English. Just English. Mike was telling our daughter to grab the mop. I was telling our son to stop putting towels on the dog. The kids were arguing about who had brought more towels. The dog was barking. The cat was still judging. Nobody was thinking about grammar. Nobody was afraid of making mistakes. Nobody was pausing to find the right word. We were just talking. Living. Being a family. In English. That had never happened before. Not like that. Not so naturally. Not so easily. I stood there, dripping water and holding a muddy towel, and I felt tears come to my eyes. Not sad tears. Happy tears. The kind that come when you realize something has changed and you didn't even notice it happening. Mike must have seen my face. He walked over, put his wet arm around my wet shoulder, and said, "We did it." Did what? I asked. We talked. In the rain. We laughed. In English. We didn't plan. We just did. He was right. We hadn't planned any of it. The rain wasn't in the schedule. The chaos wasn't in the schedule. The laughter wasn't in the schedule. But that's what made it real. For weeks, I had been treating the yard like a classroom. A safe space, yes, but still a controlled space. We went out at the same time. We did the same activity. We talked about the same things. It was helpful. It was progress. But it wasn't life. Life is messy. Life is unpredictable. Life is rain that shows up when you least expect it and forces you to run, slip, drop your water bottle, and laugh about it afterward. That rainy Saturday taught me something that no English class ever could. Language isn't something you practice in a bubble. It's something you live. You don't learn to speak by memorizing vocabulary lists. You learn to speak by standing in the rain with people you love, soaking wet, laughing so hard you can't breathe. And somehow finding the words to say, "This is crazy. I love this. I love you." We didn't say those exact words that day. But we felt them. And feeling them was enough. After we finally cleaned up the kitchen, which took forever, by the way, because 7 wet towels do not dry quickly, we sat on the couch. The kids were watching cartoons. The dog was sleeping. The cat had stopped judging. And Mike looked at me and said, "Same time next week?" I smiled. Same time. Unless it rains again. Especially if it rains again, he said. And that's when I knew. We weren't just fixing our marriage. We weren't just learning English. We were building something new. Something real. Something that could handle a little rain. Tomatoes grew, so did we. Somewhere around the 10th Saturday, Mike had an idea. He came outside holding a small plastic bag and a weird smile. The kind of smile that says, "I bought something and I'm not sure if you'll think it's stupid." "What's in the bag?" I asked. He pulled out 2 tiny green plants. They looked sad, honestly. Limp. Like they had given up on life before it even started. "Tomatoes," he said. "I bought them at the store." "The plant store." "Nursery?" I suggested. "Yes. Nursery. The plant nursery. The lady said they are easy. For beginners." I looked at the tomatoes. The tomatoes looked at me. They did not look easy. They looked like they were already planning their own funerals. But Mike was excited. And after weeks of pulling weeds together, I wasn't about to say no to something that made him smile like that. Okay, I said. Where do we put them? We spent the next hour finding the perfect spot. Not too sunny. Not too shady. Not too close to the fence. Not too far from the hose. Mike was very serious about this. He measured things with his feet. He poked the soil with his finger. He even talked to the plants. In English. Quietly, like he didn't want me to hear. You will grow, he whispered to the smaller tomato. I will help you. I pretended not to notice. But my heart grew about 3 sizes that morning. We dug 2 holes. Not too deep. Not too shallow. We put the plants in. We covered the roots with dirt. We watered them. And then we stood back and looked at our work. Now we wait, Mike said. How long? The lady said. Maybe 2 months. Or 3. I don't remember. 2 or 3 months of waiting. 4 tomatoes. In a yard that had been nothing but weeds for years. It seemed impossible. But so had talking to my husband again. So had laughing in the rain. So had feeling like maybe, just maybe, we were going to be okay. Okay, I said. We wait. And that's when it hit me. We had been so focused on pulling weeds, on removing the bad things, that we had forgotten to plant something good. The yard was cleaner now. But it was still empty. Just dirt and grass and a few stubborn weeds that kept coming back. We had cleared space. But we hadn't filled it with anything. The tomatoes changed that. Every Saturday after that, we didn't just pull weeds. We also checked on the tomatoes. Were they taller? Were they greener? Did they have flowers yet? At first, nothing happened. For weeks, the tomatoes just sat there. Not dying. Not growing. Just existing. Like they were waiting for permission to become something. I started to get impatient. Maybe we did something wrong, I said one morning. Maybe they need more sun. Or less sun. Or different dirt. Or. Mike put his hand on my shoulder. They are learning, he said. Like us. Slowly. He was right. And he was wrong. The tomatoes weren't learning. They were growing. But growing takes time. You can't rush a tomato. You can't make it grow faster by staring at it. You can't yell at it. You can't study grammar books about it. You just have to water it, give it sun, and wait. Sound familiar? That's when I started connecting the tomatoes to our English. For months, Mike and I had been pulling weeds, removing the fear, the silence, the shame. But we hadn't really planted anything new. We had just been clearing space. The tomatoes were the first thing we had planted together. And watching them grow, slowly, invisibly, day by day, taught me something about language. You don't learn English in a day. You don't learn it in a week. You learn it in small, almost invisible moments. A word here. A sentence there. A conversation that goes a little better than last time. You water it. You give it sun. And you wait. One Saturday, about a month after planting the tomatoes, I noticed something. Tiny yellow flowers. On both plants. Small. Easy to miss. But they were there. Mike. I yelled. Come look. Flowers. He came running. dropped his gloves, knelt down, stared at the flowers like they were made of gold. "Flowers mean tomatoes are coming," he said. "Soon." "How soon?" "I don't know. But soon." We sat there in the dirt, looking at those tiny yellow flowers, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Not the loud, dramatic kind. The quiet kind. The kind that doesn't shout or make promises. The kind that just sits there, small and yellow, waiting to become something more. That same Saturday, Mike tried to tell me a story about his week. He struggled. He forgot words. He said yesterday I go instead of I went. He mixed up he and she. He stopped mid-sentence 3 times to find the right word. But he didn't give up. He kept going. And I listened. Not as a teacher. Not as a critic. Just as someone who wanted to hear what he had to say. When he finished, I said, "Your English is getting better." He laughed. "No. It is still bad. But I am not scared anymore." "That's what better looks like," I said. He thought about that for a second. Then he nodded. "Maybe you are right. Maybe better is not perfect. Maybe better is not scared." The tomatoes agreed. They weren't perfect. They were small. They were still growing. Some of their leaves were yellow. One of them had a spot. But they were alive. They were trying. And every week, they were a little bit more than they had been before. One morning, I think it was the 12th or 13th Saturday, I went outside alone. Mike was still making coffee. The kids were still asleep. And there they were. Green tomatoes. Small. Hard. Not ready yet. But unmistakably tomatoes. I knelt down and touched one. It was firm. Real. Growing. Mike came outside with 2 mugs of coffee. He handed me one. Then he saw the tomatoes. His face lit up. "They came," he said softly. "They came," I agreed. We stood there in silence. Not the bad kind of silence. The good kind. The kind that doesn't need words because the words are already there, inside the tomatoes, inside the dirt, inside the space between us. And I thought about how far we had come. From that first awkward Saturday, barely looking at each other, too scared to speak. To this morning, standing side by side, drinking coffee, watching our tomatoes grow. Our English was still not perfect. Our marriage was still not perfect. The yard was still not perfect. But we were growing. Together. Slowly. Invisibly. Day by day. Just like the tomatoes. We pulled, I said, remembering something. We planted. We waited. Mike looked at me. That is past tense. Pulled. Planted. Waited. Yes, I said. Past tense. For things we already did. And now, he asked. What tense is now? I thought about it. Now is. Growing. Present continuous. Because we are not done yet. He smiled. Growing. I like that tense. So do I. So do I. What pulling weeds pulls you closer to? By the time the tomatoes were finally red, I mean really red. Not that fake pinkish color that pretends to be red, something had changed in our house. I don't know exactly when it happened. There was no announcement. No celebration. No moment where we looked at each other and said we did it. It just was different. We talked at dinner now. Not every dinner. But most of them. Small things. What happened at work. What the kids said at school. Whether we needed more milk. Normal things. Things that families talk about. And the talking wasn't perfect. It was still full of mistakes. Wrong tenses. Missing words. Strange accents. But nobody cared. Not even us. The kids had stopped noticing. To them, this was just how Mom and Dad talked. Slowly. Carefully. Sometimes funny. But always trying. One evening, after we put the kids to bed, Mike and I sat on the back porch. The sun was setting. The tomatoes were glowing red in the fading light. The weeds were still there, of course. They would always be there. But now we had tomatoes too. And flowers. And a small herb garden that the kids had started. The yard wasn't a battlefield anymore. It was a garden. A messy, imperfect, beautiful garden. Mike was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Do you remember the first Saturday?" "How could I forget?" I said. We barely looked at each other. "I was so scared," he admitted. "Not of you. Of myself. Of opening my mouth and sounding stupid." "Me too," I said. "But now." He paused, searching for words. "Now I am not scared. Not here. Not with you." That sentence, "not here, not with you," was simple. But it was everything. Because what pulling weeds had pulled us closer to wasn't perfect English. It wasn't a perfect marriage. It wasn't a perfect yard. It was safety. That's the word I had been looking for all along. Safety. The feeling of being able to open your mouth without your heart racing. The feeling of knowing that the person next to you will not laugh at your mistakes. The feeling of being understood even when your words come out wrong. For years, I had been trying to learn English in places that didn't feel safe. Classrooms where the teacher corrected every mistake. Workplaces where my accent made people frown. Stores where cashiers looked at their phones while I struggled to ask for change. Everywhere I went, I felt like I was being tested. And every time I felt tested, I failed. Not because I didn't know the words. But because my brain shut down from fear. The yard was different. The yard was safe. And safety, I learned, is the secret ingredient that no language app can sell you. There's actual research on this. Linguists call it the effective filter hypothesis. It was developed by a researcher named Stephen Krashen back in the 1980s. The idea is simple. When a learner feels anxious, embarrassed, or judged, their brain puts up a mental wall. That wall blocks language input. You can study for hours. You can memorize vocabulary lists. But if your effective filter is high, if you're scared, nothing gets through. But when you feel safe, when you're relaxed, motivated, and confident, the filter drops. Language flows in. And more importantly, language flows out. You start speaking. Not perfectly. But freely. And freedom, my friend, is where real learning happens. That's what the yard gave us. A low filter zone. A place where mistakes were not just allowed, but expected. A place where we could be beginners together without shame. And here's the beautiful thing. The safety we built in the yard didn't stay in the yard. It started to leak into the rest of our lives. One day at the grocery store, I couldn't remember the word for zucchini. I stood there in the produce section, pointing at the green squash, making a complete fool of myself. The cashier was patient. But I still felt my face getting hot. And then I remembered the yard. I remembered Mike saying this one strong without apologizing. I took a breath. And I said, I'm sorry. My English is not perfect. But I want the green one. Long. Like a cucumber. But not cucumber. The cashier smiled. Zucchini? Yes. Zucchini. Thank you. No shame. No panic. Just a small moment of imperfect communication that worked. That never would have happened before the yard. Before the yard, I would have just pointed. Or worse, I would have left without buying the zucchini. I would have let my fear of sounding stupid control my life. But the yard taught me something. Being understood is more important than being perfect. And most people want to understand you. They're not sitting there with a red pen, waiting for you to make a mistake. They're just trying to help you get your zucchini. The same thing happened with Mike at his work. He told me about a meeting where his boss asked a question and Mike didn't understand. Before the yard, he would have nodded and pretended. He would have spent the rest of the day confused and anxious. But after the yard? He said, I'm sorry. Can you say that again? Slower, please? His boss didn't get angry. His boss repeated the question. Mike answered. The meeting continued. No disaster. No humiliation. Just a person asking for help and getting it. I couldn't have done that before, Mike told me that night. Before the yard, I was too proud? Too scared? I don't know the word. Too afraid to look weak, I suggested. Yes. That. But now I know asking for help is not weak. Asking for help is smart. That's what pulling weeds pulled us closer to. Not fluency. Not perfection. But courage. The courage to be bad. The courage to ask for help. The courage to say I don't understand without feeling like a failure. And that courage changed everything. We started having real conversations. Not just about groceries and homework. But about us. About our marriage. About the years when we stopped talking. About the things we had been too scared to say in any language. One night, sitting on the back porch, Mike said, I was so lonely. Even though you were right there. I was lonely. I started crying. Not because I was sad. Because he had said it. Out loud. In English. And I understood. Me too, I said. I was so lonely. I thought I had lost you. You didn't lose me, he said. We just forgot how to find each other. And now? Now we are finding. Slowly. Like the tomatoes. That conversation wasn't perfect. We stumbled over words. We paused. We repeated ourselves. But we said it. And saying it was everything. The yard gave us back our voices. Not perfect voices. But real ones. And real voices, I've learned, are the only kind that can build a real life. So what did pulling weeds pull us closer to? It pulled us closer to each other. To our kids. To ourselves. To a version of English that wasn't about getting it right, but about getting it out. It pulled us closer to the truth that we are all beginners at something. And that being a beginner is not shameful. It's human. The weeds are still there, by the way. They always come back. But so do we. Every Saturday. With our gloves and our coffee and our imperfect English. Pulling. Planting. Growing. Together. English became our garden language. By the time the second batch of tomatoes was ready, yes, we planted more. We became those people. Something unexpected happened. English stopped being a subject we studied and started being just the language we spoke. In the garden. Not perfectly. Not fluently. But naturally. I didn't notice it at first. Change is like that, isn't it? It happens so slowly that you don't see it until one day you look back and realize you're not the same person anymore. That's what happened with our English. Somewhere between pulling weeds and planting tomatoes and chasing kids across the yard, we had stopped translating in our heads. We had stopped rehearsing sentences before saying them. We had stopped being afraid. The garden became its own little world. A world where English worked differently. Slower. Kinder. More forgiving. Here's an example. One Saturday, Mike was trying to tell me about a problem at work. He wanted to say that a machine had broken down. But he couldn't remember the word broken. So he said, the machine, it stopped. It doesn't want to work anymore. It is sleeping? No. Angry? No. It is not working. A native speaker would have said broken. But Mike said not working. And you know what? I understood perfectly. Because in the garden, we had developed our own vocabulary. Our own shortcuts. Our own way of saying things that wasn't textbook English but worked anyway. I started calling it garden English. It wasn't the English you learn in school. It was the English you learn when your hands are in the dirt and the person next to you is patient and the only thing that matters is being understood. Garden English doesn't care about prepositions. You can say, I am waiting you, instead of I am waiting for you. Garden English knows what you mean. Garden English doesn't correct your tenses. You can say yesterday I see instead of yesterday I saw. Garden English just nods and says, tell me more. Garden English is the opposite of classroom English. Classroom English is afraid of mistakes. Garden English celebrates them. Because every mistake means you tried. And trying is the only way to learn. I remember one morning, our daughter came outside while we were watering the tomatoes. She was holding a piece of paper from school. It was a spelling test. She had gotten 8 out of 10 words correct. She was upset about the 2 she missed. I'm so bad at spelling, she said. I knelt down so I could look her in the eye. You are not bad, I said. You are learning. Learning means mistakes. Look at me. My English is full of mistakes. But I am still learning. She looked at me. Your English is fine, Mom. It is not fine, I said, laughing. But it is getting better. Because I keep trying. Just like you. She thought about that for a second. Then she smiled and ran back inside to show her dad her spelling test. The one with 8 out of 10. The one she was proud of now. That moment taught me something. The way we talked about English in the garden was changing how our kids thought about learning. They weren't embarrassed by our mistakes anymore. They understood that mistakes were part of the process. They saw us trying, failing, trying again. And that was teaching them more than any lecture ever could. Garden English spread to other parts of our lives too. We started using it at the dinner table. At the grocery store. At parent-teacher conferences. Not because we forgot how to be nervous, but because we had practiced being brave so many times in the yard that bravery had become a habit. One afternoon, our son fell off his bike. He wasn't hurt badly. Just a scraped knee. But he was crying. I ran outside and knelt next to him. And the words that came out of my mouth weren't rehearsed. They weren't perfect. They were garden English. I see you. You are hurt. But you are okay. I am here. Dad is here. We are all here. Simple words. Short sentences. Not a single complex structure. But he stopped crying. Because he understood. And because he felt safe. That's what garden English does. It strips away everything unnecessary. It leaves only what matters. Connection. Understanding. Love. Mike and I started noticing that we were having conversations now that we couldn't have had 6 months earlier. Not because our vocabulary had grown so much, but because our fear had shrunk. We weren't afraid to say the wrong thing anymore. So we said things. Real things. One night, sitting on the back porch, Mike said, "I was thinking about my father. He died before we came to America. He never met the kids. He never saw this house. This yard. This was big." Mike never talked about his father. Not in English. Not in our first language. Never. "Tell me about him," I said. And he did. For an hour. In English. With mistakes. With pauses. With words he had to search for. But he did it. He told me about his father's laugh. About the way he cooked eggs. About the last time they spoke on the phone. I cried. He cried. The tomatoes watched. When he finished, he said, "I couldn't have said that before." Before the garden. Why not? I asked. Because I was afraid. Not of you. Of the words. Of not having the right words. Of saying something wrong and making his memory wrong. But now I know. The words don't have to be perfect. They just have to be mine. That's what garden English gave us. Permission to own the language. Not as a visitor. Not as a beginner. But as someone who lives here now. Someone who speaks English not because it's their first language, but because it's their language. The one they chose. The one they fought for. The one they grew, like tomatoes, from tiny seeds into something real. The garden didn't make our English perfect. It never will. I still say I eat it sometimes. Mike still mixes up he and she. The kids still correct us, because kids are terrible and wonderful like that. But we don't freeze anymore. We don't panic. We don't swallow our words and walk away. We just keep talking. In garden English. Slow. Simple. Brave. And you know what? It works. Not perfectly. But perfectly enough. The American yard culture. Here's something I never expected to learn from a garden. Americans love their yards. I mean, they really love them. It's not just about having a lawn. It's about what the lawn means. It's about being outside. Being seen. Being part of something bigger than your own fence. When we first moved to Texas, I didn't understand this. In my home country, yards were private. You didn't go outside just to be outside. You went outside to do something specific, hang laundry, fix a pipe, yell at your kids to come inside. Neighbors didn't look at your yard. They definitely didn't comment on it. A yard was your business. Nobody else's. But America is different. I noticed it early on, but I didn't understand it until the garden started growing. American yards are social. They're conversation starters. They're how neighbors become something more than strangers who happen to live next door. It started small. One Saturday morning, I was outside alone. Mike had run to the store. The kids were still sleeping. I was pulling weeds, nothing special, just the usual routine, when I heard a voice. "Morning. Those tomatoes look great." I looked up. Our neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, was standing at the fence. She was maybe 70 years old, with white hair and a smile that made you feel like you'd known her forever. She was holding a cup of coffee and wearing gardening gloves that had seen better days. "Oh. Thank you," I said. My voice came out smaller than I wanted. "They are growing. Slowly." "That's how tomatoes do," she said, nodding. "You can't rush 'em." My husband used to say tomatoes have their own calendar. You just have to wait. I didn't know what to say. In my home country, a neighbor wouldn't just start a conversation like that. It would be strange. Almost rude. But Mrs. Patterson wasn't being rude. She was being friendly. American friendly. The kind of friendly that doesn't wait for an invitation. "You're out here every Saturday," she continued. "I see you from my kitchen window. You and your husband. Working hard. It's nice to see." "You watch us?" I asked. I wasn't sure if that was creepy or sweet. "Not watch," she said, laughing. "Notice. There's a difference. In this neighborhood, most people hire someone to do their yard. But you two? You do it yourselves. Together. That's rare these days." I didn't know what to say. So I just said, "Thank you. We like it." "It shows," she said. And then she waved and went back inside. That conversation lasted maybe 2 minutes. But it changed something. Mrs. Patterson had spoken to me in English, real, natural, neighborly English, and I had understood. More importantly, I had responded. Not perfectly. But well enough. And she hadn't corrected me. She hadn't looked confused. She had just talked to me. Like I was a normal person. Because I was. Over the next few weeks, more neighbors started appearing. Not all at once. One by one. Mr. Chen from 2 houses down stopped by to ask about our compost bin. The young couple across the street waved and said yard's looking good. As they walked their dog. Even the mailman commented on the flowers one afternoon. At first, these interactions terrified me. Every time someone said something, my heart would race. I would panic internally. What if I didn't understand? What if I said something wrong? What if they laughed? But then I remembered the garden. I remembered that the weeds didn't care about my grammar. And I realized that most neighbors didn't either. The thing about American yard culture is that it's low pressure. The conversations are short. The stakes are low. Nobody is testing you. Nobody is grading your accent. They're just being friendly. And friendliness, I learned, is the best language teacher in the world. Nice day, isn't it? Those roses are beautiful. What's your secret? You need any help with that fence? I have a hammer. These aren't deep conversations. They're not going to win any literary prizes. But they're real. They're how people connect. And for someone learning English, they're perfect. Because they're short. They're predictable. And they happen again and again. I started to look forward to the neighbor conversations. Not because I was suddenly confident in my English. But because I realized something important. Most Americans don't expect you to be perfect. They expect you to be trying. And if you're trying, they'll meet you halfway. Mrs. Patterson became a regular visitor. Every Saturday, around 9 a.m., she would appear at the fence with her coffee. She would ask about the tomatoes. About the kids. About our weekend plans. Sometimes I understood everything. Sometimes I missed a word or two. But it didn't matter. She was patient. She would repeat herself. She would use simpler words. Not because she was treating me like a child. But because she wanted me to understand. You're doing great, she told me one morning. When I first moved to Texas from Ohio, I couldn't understand anyone. Southern accents sounded like a different language to me. It took me years to feel comfortable. So I get it. Learning a new way of speaking is hard. But you're doing it. Every day. In your yard. I see you. I almost cried. Not because she said something profound. But because she saw me. She saw the effort. She saw the fear. She saw the courage. And she acknowledged it. In English. Simple, kind, American English. That's what the yard gave me that no classroom ever could. Real people. Real conversations. Real patience. I started to understand something about American culture. Yards aren't just patches of grass. They're bridges. They're how you say I'm here. I'm part of this neighborhood. I care about this place. When you take care of your yard, you're not just pulling weeds. You're telling your neighbors that you belong here. And when your neighbors see you out there, working hard, they don't see your accent. They don't hear your mistakes. They see someone who is trying. And Americans respect that. One Saturday, Mrs. Patterson brought over a small bag of cucumbers from her garden. I have too many, she said. Thought you might want some. Thank you, I said. That is very kind. Very kind. You're welcome, honey. That's what neighbors do. She walked back to her house. I stood there holding the cucumbers, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not pride. Not relief. Something simpler. Belonging. I belonged here. In this yard. In this neighborhood. In this country. Not because my English was perfect. But because I was here. Trying. Growing. Just like the tomatoes. And that, I realized, is the secret of American yard culture. It's not about having the greenest grass or the most expensive flowers. It's about showing up. Being present. Connecting with the people around you, one small conversation at a time. The yard taught me English. But the neighbors taught me America. Your yard is waiting somewhere. So here we are. At the end of the story. Or maybe the beginning. That's the thing about gardens. They don't really end. They just keep growing. Season after season. Weed after weed. Tomato after tomato. It's been over a year since that first awkward Saturday. The yard looks nothing like it used to. The weeds are still there, they always come back, but now they share space with tomatoes, peppers, herbs, and a small patch of flowers the kids planted. The fence is still a little crooked. The grass is still patchy. But it's ours. We made it. Together. And our English? Still not perfect. Probably never will be. Mike still says yesterday I go sometimes. I still forget the word for zucchini. The kids still correct us, because kids are professional correctors. But something fundamental has shifted. We're not afraid anymore. Not in the yard. Not in the grocery store. Not at work. Not anywhere. The yard taught us that perfection is not the goal. Connection is. Understanding is. Being understood is. Last week, Mrs. Patterson invited us over for dinner. Real dinner. Inside her house. With placemats and everything. She made spaghetti. Her husband, who I didn't even know was still alive, honestly, because he never comes outside, told stories about his time in the army. Mike and I talked about the kids. About the garden. About our plans for the fall. The conversation wasn't smooth. There were pauses. There were moments where I didn't know a word and had to describe it instead. There was a very confusing 5 minutes where Mike tried to explain what he does for work and nobody understood, including me. But we laughed. We ate. We connected. On the way home, Mike said, "Did you ever think we would have dinner at a neighbor's house? In English?" "Never," I said. "I thought we would always be the quiet ones. The ones who wave but never talk." "Me too," he said. But the yard changed that. The yard made us brave. He was right. The yard didn't teach us vocabulary. It taught us courage. And courage, I've learned, is the foundation of every other skill. You can know 10,000 words. But if you're too scared to open your mouth, those words are useless. The yard gave us permission to be bad. And being bad, it turns out, is the only path to being good. So now I want to ask you something. What's your yard? Maybe you don't have a garden. Maybe you live in an apartment with a tiny balcony. Maybe you live somewhere with no outdoor space at all. That's fine. Your yard doesn't have to be made of dirt and grass. Your yard is any place where you feel safe enough to be bad at English. Any place where mistakes are allowed. Any place where you can open your mouth without your heart trying to escape through your throat. Your yard could be your kitchen table, with a friend who doesn't judge. Your yard could be a park bench, where you read aloud to yourself. Your yard could be a phone call with someone who speaks slower so you can understand. Your yard could be the comments section of this video, where thousands of other learners are also trying, also failing, also growing. Your yard is wherever you decide to stop being perfect and start being real. I know you're tired. I know you've been trying for years and still feel stuck. I know you've watched 1,000 videos and memorized 1,000 words and still freeze when someone asks you a simple question. I know because I was you. Standing in a messy yard, holding a weed, wondering if I would ever be good enough. But here's what I need you to hear. You are already good enough. Not when your English is perfect. Not when you lose your accent. Not when you stop making mistakes. Right now. Today. With every wrong tense and missing word and awkward pause. You are good enough to be understood. You are good enough to connect. You are good enough to try. The weeds don't care if your English is perfect. Neither should you. So here's my challenge to you. Find your yard. It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be beautiful. It just has to be yours. And find someone to pull weeds with. A friend. A family member. A stranger on the internet. Someone who will laugh with you, not at you. Someone who will say, "I don't understand," instead of pretending. Someone who will pull the same weed, at the same time, until it comes out. And then start. Start small. Start ugly. Start scared. But start. Say one sentence today. One imperfect, real sentence. Not to a teacher. Not to an app. To a person. Or to yourself in the mirror. Or to the tomatoes, if you have tomatoes. Just say something. Out loud. In English. And don't apologize for it. That's how gardens grow. One seed at a time. One weed at a time. One word at a time. The yard is waiting for you. Not someday. Not when you're ready. Not when you're perfect. Right now. Today. This very minute. Pull on your gloves. Grab your coffee. And step outside. Your English doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be yours. So here's the question I keep asking myself every Saturday morning when I step into that yard. If pulling weeds could pull us closer, two people who had stopped talking, stopped trying, stopped believing, what could your yard do for you? Not a garden? I don't care. Your yard might be a kitchen counter, a morning walk, a voice note you're too scared to send. The magic isn't in the dirt. It's in showing up. Imperfect. Awkward. Afraid. And doing it anyway. This channel isn't about perfect English. There are a million other channels for that. This channel is about real English. The kind that stumbles. The kind that laughs at itself. The kind that grows slowly, like tomatoes, and tastes better because you waited. So here's my deal with you. Every week, I'll bring you another story. Another mess. Another small victory. Another mistake that turned into something beautiful. And you? You just keep showing up. To your yard. To your English. To your life. The weeds are waiting. But so are the tomatoes. Hit subscribe. Not because you need another YouTube channel in your life. But because you need permission to be bad at something and keep going anyway. I'll be here next Saturday. Same time. Same messy English. Same hope. See you in the yard. Subscribe now. Turn on the bell. And tell me in the comments, where's your yard? I read every comment. And yes, I make mistakes in my replies too. That's the whole point.